Hello everyone, Laura K. Buzz here, and I've been playing The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, if you want to know my, completely as spoiler-free as I could possibly make them thoughts about this game, there's a different video for that. Go look up my light spoilers video that should be up on this same channel right about now. It's like 20 minutes of me talking about what is in the game while trying not to talk about anything too specific because spoilers, but this video is me just talking a little more off the cuff, a little more willing to talk light spoilers, about how I feel about this game. So if you don't want to know anything you don't have to know my opinion, go watch the other video. If you don't mind a little bit of spoilers to know some specifics and watch me get a little excited about some of the things I find exciting about this game, this video might be for you, but I'm gonna start spoiler light with my general overview feelings, and then we'll get more specific as we go. So watch as much of this as you need to understand how I feel, and then duck out when you're yeah, I don't want to know anymore. Let's play. We'll just wait and play the game. So, general overall opinion, I really like Tears of the Kingdom so far. I talk about this in my other video. I put this game down after a few days because Breath of the Wild was a really magical experience to play through at the same time that everyone in the world was playing through, and we were all organically understanding and discovering things and mechanics as a community, and I feel like that magic has been somewhat recaptured here with Tears of the Kingdom. I got to the end of the first of the proper dungeons. Dungeons are back in this, kind of. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I got to the end of it, and realized I didn't want to be playing this in a vacuum. I wanted to be playing it with everyone else, and I've kind of played just the bare amount I need to understand how I feel about all of the core mechanics here, and not any further. So take this opinion with the grain of salt of I haven't played most of the game in terms of seeing how repetitive certain mechanics might get, or whether they hold up long term. So at its core, Tears of the Kingdom is Breath of the Wild if it was a little less afraid to drop linear experiences into its open world, but also a little more guided. That's not to say that there is not that same sense of see a thing, go do it, nothing stopping you from going and doing whatever you want right from the start of the game that Breath of the Wild has. That sense is still there, but there is more of a guiding hand pointing you towards curated activities that you might want to do in a set order, and the game is less eager to go, here's the final boss, if you want to go fight it without having done anything we've put in the world, you can do that. I believe you can still go and just fight the final boss if you want to do that, but the game doesn't put a big glowing marker and say, that's where the final boss is, go fight them. I'm going to start by talking about the dungeons in some degree of detail, because I think this is the thing most people are curious about. Dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom kind of remind me of Skyward Sword, and I'm not saying that in that I think the dungeon, when you get there and it says the Sky Temple or whatever, is as intricate as a Skyward Sword dungeon, but in the sense that in Skyward Sword, the journey through the overworld to the dungeon was set up like a dungeon. You had an overworld that was full of puzzles you had to solve and combat you had to do that was thematically tied to the dungeon you were working towards. And that's where I want to set expectations for the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. The journey to the dungeon is as much a part of the dungeon as the dungeon itself. If you judge Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons purely on the section that says it's a dungeon when you get there and you get the dungeon map, it's definitely better than the Divine Beast scene in Breath of the Wild, and a lot more akin to something like, if you played the Champion's Ballad DLC, there was a final dungeon that was a bit more elaborate, that involved putting cogs into gears and had multiple rooms, and you were activating this multi-stage door to get to a big boss fight. It's kind of got more of that feel. Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons definitely have more of a thematic tie to the element of the area you're in. They have unique bosses that aren't just recolored elemental blight cannons. But the most interesting part of the dungeons, and I think the thing that is going to make them work for a lot of people, is that you have an ability that you unlock that helps you navigate the dungeon and you get to keep afterwards. The Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild gave you an ability when you completed the dungeon, like you'd get Rivali's Gale, for example, to dash up into the air, get a gust of wind. But most of those abilities weren't traversal abilities. They were like combat abilities and things. They didn't help you in ways that would get you to solve, help you solve puzzles or anything. Tears of the Kingdom has abilities that you unlock before the dungeon is complete, and the dungeon involves using those abilities, kind of, and that helps them feel more like a Zelda dungeon. Like, there's no, I opened a chest and found the hook shot, and now that's going to help me around the dungeon, but there is, I have an ability. That ability is going to help me navigate the dungeon, and I get to take that ability on with me going forward. It has that pacing and progression element of puzzle solving that is reminiscent of how Zelda dungeons used to be. I'm gonna talk slightly more spoilery here, and I'm gonna avoid the culmination of this, but I want to talk about like a thing here, which is in one of the trailers for this game, you see Link fighting alongside Sidon. Like, Sidon is just like fighting enemies alongside Link. That is gameplay from Link traversing a dungeon with an NPC. That is a thing you get to do. You get to go do the dungeons with an NPC who has abilities that will help you through the dungeon, but also will just help you in combat. And that's really cool. And that is a narrative aspect of dungeons. You are traveling through dungeons with these NPCs. And I think this ties into, I think, why I'm going to move off of dungeons here. I think that Tears of the Kingdom does a much better job of narrative than Breath of the Wild did in many ways, because Breath of the Wild's biggest shortcoming is that emotionally they were trying to get you to care about Link's relationships with not the modern day champions, the people that he was actually saving the world with. They wanted you to care about the set of champions from 100 years ago that died a century before you started playing the game, that Link has all these emotional developments with, but they're all dead. And like, they didn't make any effort to make the people you were on your adventure with today feel like they had that same emotional bond to Link. And having NPCs go to the dungeons with you and be part of your adventure is a big part of making this game feel like it actually cares about you caring about these characters, and that is cool. From what I can tell, there is a lot of ability to still go do stuff completely out of order in Tears of the Kingdom if you want to. If you want to go track down, if you want to go track down something that you mechanically haven't been pointed towards and probably shouldn't have yet, and that narratively you don't understand how you're getting it, you can just do that. You can just like find things that you don't know, like, I don't understand why this is here or what's going on, but I found it, and the game will still let you do that. But there is definitely more of a guiding hand that is trying to go, look, we're going to start you in like a 2-hour long linear environment where you have to do things in order, to set you up for the idea that this world is dotted with linear encounters that we want you to do. Like, ideally, there's a set order of progression that makes sense, and we're going to try and guide you so you know what that is. If you want to ignore us once we've set up the guideposts, you're welcome to, but, like, there is more of a... There are linear encounters that you can go do, and there is a, like, an intended order for them that you have to make more of an effort to say no and walk in the opposite direction from if you want to do that. In terms of like general moment-to-moment gameplay pacing, I would say that a lot of like your moment-to-moment of this game is going to feel very familiar to Breath of the Wild. If you did not like Breath of the Wild's, here is a world full of map towers that you use to get height, to see where all the local shrines are, to travel to the shrines, to unlock stamina and health upgrades, to keep going. If you did not like that pacing, Tears of the Kingdom is unlikely to change how you feel about that. You're probably going to feel very, very similar, but if you liked that pacing, there's more of it here. A lot of that stuff is somewhat repeated, for better or worse. What I will say is that the open world is littered with a lot more substantial content. I talk about this in the spoiler light review. There is a lot more. How do I put this? Uh, Breath of the Wild had like mostly very minimal side quests where you went and did one thing and it was very simple and you got your generic reward and that was fine. You had like a small handful of larger quests. The main one people think of is Tarrytown, where you had to travel to different corners of the world collecting NPCs to build up this community. Um, Tears of the Kingdom differentiates between two different kinds of side quests. There are side quests, which are like Breath of the Wild's pretty small, generic, simple, to the point side quests. And now there are side adventures. And side adventures are like big, sprawling, multi stage quests that have very clear objectives and very clear rewards, and will often be multi-stage quests that might branch off into smaller sub-quests and are usually narratively tied. Giving a kind of vague example, early on, I found one where it's like, hey, here's a really functionally cool piece of like armor set that you are definitely going to want. We need you to go to a bunch of the stables around Hyrule and go looking for rumors about a thing. And then each of these stables you go to has like a little side adventure of its own that branches off that is narratively fascinating, and you're having to complete all these little other side adventures, and the more of them you complete, the more piece by piece you start getting given this cool functional armor. Like, there's more things like this that feel tied into the world, tied into its NPCs, and feel like substantial commitments with worthwhile rewards. Things that feel similar to, but in many ways like they surpass the Tarrytown quest. There is a lot more of that to be seen in Breath of the Wild, and that's the kind of stuff that really feels like it makes this more impressive, I think. Beyond that, let's talk about the new abilities. Ultra Hand works really well functionally, and it's great to have a replacement for Magnesis that works on things that aren't magnetic, as long as they're not alive. Ultra Hand is fiddly. I'm not going to deny it. It's kind of fiddly to rotate objects around functionally and make them go into the place you want to make them. Good piece of advice up front. If the controls for Ultra Hand feel like they're not gelling for you, try inverting either the horizontal or vertical rotation direction, because that's stumped myself and a few other people I've spoken to. There's a learning curve to rotating objects in this game. It takes a bit of wrapping your head around, and it gets easier with time, but it's not immediately intuitive, and that is going to be a hurdle for people, and you don't have to do it hugely often or under pressure. You very rarely have to do it like in the heat of combat where there's like a penalty if you don't do it quickly, but it's initially a little frustrating. It can get a little tricky. Beyond that, Ascend, nice for puzzles, not used terribly frequently, but it is satisfying when it's an option. Being able to go through any ceiling that isn't too high above Link and isn't too angled is really great for, I want to scale a mountain and it's raining, but I see a cave. Go in the cave, shoot up to the top of the mountain rather than slipping down the cave. It's great. Recall, surprisingly functional in combat. I really enjoy its combat utility as much as its traversal mechanics, even if its traversal mechanics can somewhat trivialize a lot of potential problems you might have in the game. And like, I honestly love that you can use it to trivialize a lot of like, clearly there's an intended puzzle here, and if you don't like feel like doing the puzzle, you can just kind of use recall to bypass them entirely, and I kind of love that. Fuse is the big one to talk about are the main starting abilities, which lets you stick basically anything in the world onto your shield, arrows, or sword. First up, I love the mechanic, but I wish that you didn't have to. If you've got an object in your inventory and you want to fuse it to your sword, you have to go into your inventory, hold the item, go out to the open world, drop it on the floor, then use fuse to fuse it to your sword. You can't fuse it from inside the menu, and I understand kind of why that is. They want you to like pre-prepare before you go into a combat scenario, or in the heat of the moment pick up a thing that doesn't have anything fused to it and fuse something that an enemy dropped. I get that. I do still wish I could fuse things in the heat of combat. I wish I could just like fuse a thing in my inventory and be done with it sometimes, but the fuse mechanic works really well. I genuinely think that it does a great job of making the the weapon durability system work better, in that Tears of the Kingdom tries to make weapons a lot more throwaway than they were in Breath of the Wild. It's very rare to find anything that is like one of a kind or unique. In this, you are picking up a lot of generic bases for weapons and going, cool, what do I have that, either has an elemental magic type or bludgeoning or the right stat line in my pocket? Throw that on my weapon. Cool. I've got a thing that's going to functionally work, and I know it's going to break because I glued a stick and a monster horn together. I'm not expecting that to last. But like the fact that every time a weapon does break, it frees up an item slot for you to try something weird and new, I think takes weapon durability from feeling like just purely a punishment and makes it feel more like an opportunity for experimentation. The example I used in my like spoiler light review is, hey, if my stick fused to a monster horn breaks, I now have a slot open in my inventory. Maybe this is a good opportunity for me to take a magic wand and stick some meat on the end of it and find out if that makes meat magic or not. Also, I'm gonna make one recommendation to you early on. Fuse a minecart to a shield and then shield surf. It's the coolest thing. You can do it right from the start of the game, and I don't want to shield surf with anything else anymore. But like, it's. I like the degree of experimentation this offers. I've seen some people who are worried that you're going to spend way too much of your time in menus, particularly with fusing things to arrows. Yeah, if you want to just be firing fire arrows at a thing, you can no longer just select fire arrows and like fire off a bunch of them without having to menu interact at all. If you want to be firing a bunch of fire arrows, you open up a little menu while you've got your bow drawn and select, say, fire choo-choos, and then every arrow you have to reselect fire choo-choos to add another fire choo-choo to your arrow. But it's not as much of a cumbersome thing as it seems like it would be. And I say this, you're gonna have to just trust me on this a little bit. Let's say you have like 30 arrows and 30 fire choo-choos and you just want to be firing fire arrows at something. Once you've like selected it carefully the first time, beyond that, draw your bowstring, tap D-pad up. Like, don't even look at the menu. Don't even wait to see the menu. Just tap D-pad up. It'll add another fire choo-choo. So you're like, draw bow, tap up, let arrow go. It's a lot less of a I have to feel like I'm like stop start than it seems like it would be. You can like very quickly just tap, it starts loading up the next elemental arrow type. It's not the worst. It's if you're swapping between what you're fusing to an arrow, that's when you have to kind of slow down a little bit, but even then it's not. It didn't feel like it ruined the pacing of combat. A little more I want to talk about, and I think these will be the last things I want to talk about in a little more depth. The Sky Islands, a lot less of a like huge part of the game than marketing made them seem. They're fun. They're usually like little tiny mini dungeon environments where it's like, I'm trying to get from here to that spot up there, and I got to work out like how I'm going to use machinery to get there, or my abilities, or fight my way. And it feels like little mini authored dungeons that usually have a fun little reward at the end of them. They feel disconnected from each other. They're just little things to do stuff with in the world. I enjoy them. They're fun. They're definitely not like a huge second world of their own that like is gonna be where you spend nearly as much time as Hyrule Surface. The other thing I'm going to talk about is the underground of this game, which is gonna be divisive. There is a whole underground map to Hyrule that is basically the entire size of Hyrule's overworld, and people's initial impressions of that are gonna be, this is pretty empty. The underground is a little intimidating when you first go to it because it is almost entirely pitch black. You have to bring a bunch of like resources to be able to light it up enough to see where you're going, which is a big barrier to exploration. Is just having enough like bright bloom seeds, which are like little light bulb seeds, to just light your way. But there's also basically enemies down there and like puddles of ooze that if you take damage, you lose an entire heart. Like if if you rest up or go back up to the surface, you'll get them back, but you will have a heart that will be not only like you lost some health, you can't refill that with food or hearts or whatever, you lose max health while like when you take damage down there, which makes excursions like really dangerous. And it's a really interesting environment because you have to be like very prepared to go down there. You have to be prepared for these excursions. You have to be ready for the challenge that this place is. And initially, it comes across as like just a place full of monsters that you can explore, but it's kind of barren and it's kind of unclear why. And there are some objectives that sort of point you towards where to go. But the thing about the underground, the more time I spend down there, is it is full of really scary threats that are just like not signposted at all. And I really like the way that the underground has like cool, fascinating surprises hidden just off the beaten path. But also, you might just turn a corner and be like, oh, there's just a whole boss fight that's not only a boss fight, but if it hits me, I lose max health too. And it's just like right there. It is a weirdly terrifying place of secrets, and I'm so curious what else is down there. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. I felt like I was wandering and like wandering a bit aimlessly, and that it was a bit barren, until I started realizing like how many big surprises I was probably walking right past without realizing. Because this place is so dark, there might be a really cool thing just like 20 feet to your left that you just haven't, you didn't put a light there, you don't know that that cool thing is just out of vision. Having played a good chunk of this game, I'm really happy with what Tears of the Kingdom's putting together, but it's going to be a little divisive. It's certainly not built to be as open-ended, or at least as forward-facing open-ended as Breath of the Wild was. And for some people who loved like the any percent speedrun nature of Breath of the Wild, they're going to be like, oh, it's a little too linear and it's hand-holding me a little too much. There's going to be people who will, go the other way and wish that it had leaned more into being a linear traditional Zelda. It's trying to be the best of both worlds. It's trying to put content to please linear 3D Zelda fans and open world Zelda fans and give them both something to love here. And for me, it really clicks. I was worried that a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild would struggle to capture the magic of my first experience with Breath of the Wild, because so much of that game was about exploration and discovery of a world I'd not seen before, and Tears of the Kingdom is obviously set in the same world as Breath of the Wild. They have filled it with so much stuff that is really surprising and catching me off guard and reinventing what I thought I knew. Some of the things that I think are going to be divisive, if you hated weapon durability and you hated slipping down mountains when you were trying to climb them in the rain, and you hated them to such a degree that you're like, I don't want you to give me solutions to those problems, I just want to take those elements of the game out. I don't want you to give me the option to make an elixir that lets me stick to walls a bit more in the rain. I want slipping in the rain to be gone. I don't want weapon durability to be about having throwaway Franken weapons that feel more disposable and more about experimentation, so I don't feel as bad about using weapons up. No, I just want weapon durability gone. If you feel that way, Tears of the Kingdom probably isn't going to be for you, in that it doubles down on some of the elements that people didn't like about Breath of the Wild and goes, we're not going to take those elements out, but we're going to try and offer you tools to mitigate the elements, the things about them that felt frustrating. And that works for me, but it's not going to work for everyone. I have so much more time to put into this game. As I sort of alluded at the start, I put this game down pretty early on because I wanted to play through this at the same time as sort of everyone else is and discover it with the rest of the world. But like, I think Nintendo's got something really special on their hands again here. Like, I put this down because it feels like this is going to be a moment in gaming again, and I don't want to be having this moment by myself pre-release. I want to be having it with everyone else. So, Tears of the Kingdom, it feels pretty special, but like, in ways that are very built off the fact that it is a sequel to Breath of the Wild. It doesn't feel like just some DLC bolted on. It feels like its own game, and I'm really excited about it.